Right next to me. I'm talking square bits. I'm talking real on to you, baby. Square bits. I'm talking real to you, baby. Square bits. I'm talking real on to you, baby. Square bits. Tina Marie. So I was like, it is Saturday morning. I'm usually not up this early, but I guess I'm up this early because I go to bed earlier nowadays. So I go to bed between like 10:30, girl. Like, I be knocked out. And it's funny because I took like a little nap. I fell asleep on something called Happily Never After. And that show is just funny. Like, it's about newlyweds who die at the hands of their spouse. And some of the cases are sad. Like, one particular case, the dude, he was a 43-year-old virgin. And he marries a young girl that's like, in the picture, she looked like she was 30 something. But the actors, they look like they might have been 20 years apart. But regardless of the fact, he was a little younger than her. And she used him and played him for his money and killed him. It was really sad because it's like everybody said he was a good guy. He was a good person. He never dated no one. And that was his first girlfriend, wife, everything. His first everything. And she did that to him. And it's like, that's sad, to have your first and to end up killing you. And it happens to the best of us, unfortunately. Sometimes, your first love ends up breaking your heart, but they don't end up killing you. Like, that's really sad. She could have just left him and walked away like a normal person. But because he had money and stuff, and she filed for divorce at 3 months. So any logical person knows you're not going to get nothing after 3 months. Like, you're not entitled to anything. That's not even a marriage. That's not even a relationship. 3 months is nothing. Like, the fact that she felt entitled is the arrogance for me. So she got a lawyer. He got his lawyer. Like, you haven't even been with him 3 years and you think you're going to get his money, his cars, and possessions. It don't go that way. So when she realized that she wasn't going to get nothing after 3 months, that's when she decided to murder him. And it was so sad because it's like, you could have just left him alone. You didn't have to do that, And the pictures that they showed of the real person, she wasn't even all that. But I guess in his eyes, But it's just really sad. It's called Happily Never After. It talks about newlywed crimes. But that's not what I wanted to talk about today. What I wanted to talk about is, does porn kill? So you guys know Ted Bundy, right? Ted Bundy was a serial killer, and his last interview, he said that he started watching porn at 12 years old because they asked him, like, well, why did you turn into this monster? What provoked you? And he said porn. And I wanted to talk about that because I recently saw a documentary on Netflix. Shout out to Netflix again. Netflix is on a roll. Like, they have so much good stuff on now. They talked about the red light district of the 70s, and it was called the Times Square Killer. His name was Richard Cottingham, Cottingham, and his first name Richard, and he was married. Ted Bundy had a girlfriend. John Wayne Gacy was married, and this one was married too. A suburban guy, had a job. What he used to do was he started killing girls in his own neighborhood. And when it got too much attention, he switched to prostitutes. So they did an interview with him in jail as well. And they was like, why? He was like, oh, because they would say things to him that would trigger. Like, one particular girl was like, I'm going to go to the cops. And so then he killed her. He was like, if she would have never said that, she'd be alive today. But I think they do it because it's a God complex. Like, I can end your life and that's what I'm going to do. And that's like the worst thing that, God gives us the right to give a decision. But I think that's the worst thing. The worst power he ever gave to man is the ability to end someone else's life. That's like the worst gift that we have. The ability to kill. It's sad. So with this guy, when I read up on it, it said that he probably killed around 100 women, but he went to jail for like, I think about 10 or 15. But basically what he would do is he would torture them. He would go to Times Square and that's where he would find them. He would like take them on like a little date to the bar, get them drinks and put stuff in their drinks. And when they would wake up, he'd be on top of them, raping them, whatever. And the beautiful thing about so we all know that it was a red light district, and then now it's not like that no more. Anybody who lives in New York, or if you've been to New York, you know that Times Square is a beautiful place now. There's movie theaters, there's Broadway, there's a lot of things. There's no prostitutes whatsoever on Times Square now. There's no peep shows. The things that I heard on that documentary, I wasn't shocked, but it's like it just shows how disgusting that generation was. Like, they talk about my generation, like baby boomers are nasty. Like, they said how these people had orgy parties, like continuous orgy parties, right? And then on top of that, they had sex shows where people would have sex on the stage. Like, that's disgusting. Why would you want to watch people? I just never understood the concept of porn. A lot of people watch it, but to me, that's just too gross. To go to a live show and people having sex on stage. Then they had peep shows where it wasn't where the man just look at some titties and that's it. No, it was he would put his private inside of an opening and get a blowjob right then and there. And some of them would get violent with these women and nothing would be done. That was the sad part. Like, there was a former porn star that was on the interview, and he said him and his wife, they would do sex acts on the stage. And he said he remembers a guy, he was taking it too far and he had to beat the guy's ass because he tried to like abuse his wife. He came backstage and was like trying to put his foot under the door, and so he had to handle business and beat him up, because he was taking, a lot of these men would get fixated, they would get obsessed with these porn star women, and it was just a very dark time. Anybody that tells you the 70s was great, it probably was as far as other things, but when it comes to like Times Square, red light district, if they went over there, they nasty. Like, and it explains why so many grandfathers did disappearing acts. They probably was going over there. That to me is just like, that's nasty. That's not even sex. To me, that's bestiality. That's on another level. And the fact that this went on for 15 years, that the Times Square was like that, is like, wow, how disgusting was that generation to everything was porn, right? And so this created also the 70s. If you study the 70s is who had the most serial killers. Our serial killer now was Samuel Little. He's locked up now, and he actually started in the 70s. They didn't catch him until a couple of years ago, and I studied him too in school. But all the famous serial killers, most of them came out in the 70s. So it tells you that era of time was a horrible time. We talking about unemployment. We talking about drugs. You talking about people who couldn't provide for their families. We talking about a time in Harlem where people was running down butt naked because they were on drugs. Like, the 70s was horrible for a lot of people. A lot of people were in poverty. A lot of people, it just was not a good time. And this is why people turn to religion, which makes perfect sense. If you have unemployment, you have crime, you have despair, you have Vietnam, you have all these horrible things happening, people often will turn to religion for hope, right? The 80s was a horrible time, but it started to get better as far as the economy. Most people in the 80s got jobs. Um, your parents or your grandparents, they more than likely were working, and their economic status was a little better than the 70s. And then the 90s was great. You had Bill Clinton, and even though Bill Clinton had his flaws, a lot of people would say that was the best time of America's life where it was economically good. That was really a good time in America, the 90s. People were getting businesses, people were working, people were flourishing, it wasn't a perfect time, but it started evolving to get better. The 2000s with Y2K and technology and everything like that. And then it started to get bad again in 2009 with the recession, but it wasn't as bad as the 70s. Like the 70s was so horrible, it's considered the worst time in America. The 70s, it really was. The Depression, of course, was horrible, and then the 70s. A lot of people say the 70s was really, really bad as far as crime and everything else. The 80s, it had crime too, but again, people was working. There were more jobs. You had more job availability in the 80s than you did the 70s. And it wasn't that many serial killers in the 80s. You had some crime, but the 70s had all the serial killers. And I think it has to do a lot with the time we were living in and the red light districts. Times Square wasn't the only place where they had these porn movie theaters. My old high school was on 215 Jamaica. And those of you from Queens, you know that Jamaica Avenue, used to be a red light district. It used to have movie theaters of people. The same way Times Square was, that's how Jamaica Avenue was. And I'm sure parts of Brooklyn was probably the same way too. So this wasn't just a Times Square issue. This was all over the place. And so you had guys that were watching these movies and jerking off in a seat. It was a very horrible time. It really was. And, in the late 70s, which was 1979, a man by the name of Pastor Boyd, he took over the property. So, and made it a church/school. The building next to it became a Bible Institute/school. And we had Site 1, Site 2. Site 1 in Cambria Heights was kindergarten through 5th grade, or nursery through 5th grade. And then where I was at, Site 2, it would be 6th grade to 12th grade. Because I came in at 8th grade, so I was there from 8th to 12th. So, yeah. So that's the question I have for y'all. Is porn to blame for the violence? And the good thing is they had protests. So when people say, oh, protesting don't do nothing, yes, it does. It literally changes laws. Okay? The reason why the red light district and everything else shut down regarding to porn and these peep shows, they protested. Women got together and was like, they felt like the violence in the porn was creating all these serial killers. And they was like, we have to stop it now. We need to stop it out. And they did. And could you imagine those type of places in today's time? It would have been nuts. It would have been crazy. It was crazy back then, but it's like, that's so disgusting to know that that was the norm back then. That was normal for people to go to orgy parties and swinger parties, and they had them on every corner. It was normal for a man to go to a peep show and get, a blowjob. It was normal for people to just have random crazy sex. It was normal. And that's insane to me. Like, can't nobody from that era talk about something. No. And then it's funny because they always talk about whatever, but that generation, you had plenty of single mothers, because most of my friends' parents, they didn't even know their fathers. So the narrative that they try to paint saying, oh, they used to, what they said, oh, everybody was married. Everybody was not married. That's a lie. That's a whole lie, you know. So yeah, it's just the 70s was a very dark time, and you got to do your research because a lot of old people are delusional. So Netflix is exposing everything, okay? It's exposing everything. Like, what? This is what was going on in the 70s after they done said in the 60s you had serial killers. Hello, the Boston Strangler. That's from the 60s, y'all. The 60s, not the 90s. Boston Strangler is from the 60s, okay? The 60s. During the time when no, it was the 60s. Ted Bundy is from the 70s. He's not from the 90s, okay? Now, Jeffrey Dahmer, he's from the 90s, but he was killing men. But the people that was killing the women, it was all 60s and 70s. Ted Bundy started his attacks in the 60s and then went into the 70s. John Gacy, same thing. He started attacking people 69 and then went into the 70s. Like, yeah, the 60s and the 70s was a dark time. Don't listen to them. It was a horrible time. Also, the police department, they laid off 5,000 police officers. That's a lot of people to lay off in the 70s, y'all. Economically, it was bad. You know, that's sad when you gotta lay off. And that's when they laid off the police officers, crime went up. So we do need our law enforcement. Forget what you heard. You do need police officers, right? And also, crime in the 90s and 2000s went down compared to the 70s. And somebody said it on the documentary, and they was an old school person. They was a retired officer. They said that even though you have your crimes and stuff now, he said, trust me when I say this, there was more crime in the 70s, in the 60s, and in the 80s than now. So you know how people say, oh, nowadays this, nowadays that? No. This is from a retired detective from NYPD. He said, listen, because, you know, them boys, you know, they have their sons and their grandsons that's in the force. And they all sit down and they talk. They said, listen, during my career is when you had more crime in the 70s and the 80s and in the 60s. It was more crime back then than now. Now it's crazy with things going on, but don't let nobody tell you different. Them people was crazy back then, right? Crime has went down. You have more officers now. They had layoffs back then, you know, so they didn't have the manpower to cover crimes, you know. But yeah, that's the question for today. Is there a correlation between porn and violence? I say yes, because once they shut it down, and Times Square is actually a nice place to go now, and Jamaica Avenue, yes, it's not that much crime on Times Square. You might hear something here and there, but it's nothing like how it was back then, you know. And the guy, which is the Times Square killer, Richard Cottingham, he was a family man, he was married, and his wife was smart and filed for divorce right after, you know, because some women, I don't think any woman would want to believe that their husband is like that, but it is what it is. But yes, check it out if you have Netflix, or stream it, or however, whatever. It's called The Times Square Killer, right? Very interesting. It's very educational. And yeah, porn versus violence. What is the cause of it? And those are my thoughts.